The dog by the fence, the first time anyone noticed him. The German shepherd was sitting perfectly still beside a broken wooden fence, rain dripping from his matted fur, his gaze fixed on the road that led nowhere. For 7 days he hadn't moved much. He didn't bark, didn't whine, didn't even seem to breathe until the wind brushed against his fur. The neighbors said he'd been there since the storm, the one that tore down half the old house and left the rest hanging like a wound that wouldn't close. Every morning, the world passed him by. Cars rolled through puddles, children shouted on their way to school, and still he waited. His ribs pressed sharply against his skin. His tail lay flat in the mud. Sometimes, when thunder echoed far away, he'd lift his head, ears twitching, hope flickering for a heartbeat, then fading just as quickly. It wasn't hunger that kept him there. It was something else, something deeper. On the 7th day, Clara saw him. She was on her way back from the store, her umbrella barely holding against the drizzle, when her eyes caught his. Dark, glassy, ancient with loss. There was something in that stare that made her stop. It wasn't just a dog behind a fence. It was grief made flesh. She'd seen that same look once before, in the mirror, after her husband died. The rain hit harder. He didn't flinch. Water rolled down his nose, dripped from his whiskers, and still he kept his vigil, as though the person he waited for might return any second. Clara hesitated, unsure if she should speak, unsure if her voice would break something sacred in his silence. But the weight in her chest told her to try. "Hey there," she whispered through the fence. "Are you waiting for someone?" The dog didn't move, but his eyes flickered, a faint recognition, or maybe exhaustion. Nearby, the wind caught a torn piece of blue fabric stuck to the wire. It fluttered weakly like a forgotten flag, and Clara suddenly understood. This wasn't a stray wandering aimlessly. This was a guardian who had lost his purpose. She left food, stepping back to give him space. He didn't touch it while she stood there. Only when she walked away did he drag it closer, as if ashamed to need help. And as she turned to look back, she saw it, a small patch of disturbed earth beneath the fence, marked by paw prints and a single wilted flower. That's when Clara realized he wasn't just waiting. He was mourning. In that moment, something inside her shifted. She didn't know it yet, but this silent dog, soaked and trembling by a fence no one else cared about, was about to change everything she thought she knew about loss, about love, and about what it truly means to stay when everyone else is gone. The woman who stayed Clara began returning every day. At first, she told herself it was just to check if the dog was still alive. But deep down she knew better. There was something in his silence that mirrored her own. She'd lost her husband 2 years ago, a car crash that left her half-breathing for months. She'd learned to live with the ache, but never to quiet it. And now, standing by that fence, she saw the same ache in him. She called him Hope. Not because he had any, but because she wanted to give him some. Every morning she left food just beyond the gate, small offerings laid like prayers. He never touched them while she watched. But later she'd find the bowls empty, the grass pressed where he'd lain. Neighbors whispered that she was wasting her time, that he'd belonged to the old man who died in that house. "He'll die there too," they said. But Clara couldn't turn away. Each visit felt less like charity and more like confession. She spoke to him, not as one speaks to an animal, but to someone who understands pain. "I know what it's like to wait," she whispered through the wood, to hope someone might come back. One night, she found him lying closer to the fence, his breathing shallow, eyes unfocused. Panic ripped through her chest. She knelt in the mud, reaching her hand through the gap. "Please," she begged softly, "just eat, please." The dog's gaze met hers, not past her this time, but into her. Something fragile passed between them, a thread of recognition, of trust. It was small, trembling, but real. That night, Clara went home soaked, her heart hammering. She didn't know it yet, but that moment, that look, was the beginning of both their healing. The language of trust days turned into weeks. Hope began to eat in front of her, cautiously at first, then with small, growing confidence. His fur regained a faint sheen, his ribs softened beneath new weight. But the healing was uneven. Loud noises made him flinch. Shadows sent him crawling under the broken gate. Clara never forced him. She spoke softly, her movements deliberate. Every evening she sat outside the fence reading aloud from her old books. Her voice became a bridge across the silence, her words a promise that the world could still be gentle. One night, a storm broke. Thunder rolled through the valley, shaking the earth. Hope bolted from his shelter, eyes wide with terror, pressing himself against the corner of the yard. Clara ran to the fence, soaked and shivering. "It's okay," she whispered, kneeling in the rain. "You're safe." He didn't move at first. But then, inch by inch, he crept forward until his head pressed against her outstretched hand. His trembling slowed. Her tears mixed with the rain as she leaned closer. "You're home," she whispered. By morning, the storm had passed. When she opened her door, Hope was lying by her porch, his head resting on her shoe as if to anchor himself to something finally real. The first door opened, Hope followed her everywhere now. To the mailbox, to the garden, to the gate where they first met. His tail wagged softly when she laughed, his eyes tracking her every step. But he still refused to cross thresholds. Every time Clara tried to open the front door, he'd stop, one paw on the porch, one in the dirt. The house seemed to frighten him, like it carried ghosts he wasn't ready to meet. She didn't push him. Healing couldn't be hurried. She left the door open for hours at a time, letting sunlight spill across the floorboards. One afternoon, she pretended not to notice as he took his first cautious step inside. He sniffed the air, trembled, then lay down just beyond the doorway, halfway in, halfway out. That night, she found him asleep by the threshold. The next morning, he followed her all the way to the kitchen. Each step was quiet, uncertain, but each one was a victory. Later that week, she took him to the vet. The doctor ran his hands gently along Hope's spine. "He's been through a lot," he murmured. "Dehydration, malnutrition, but the emotional trauma, that's deeper." Clara nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Can he recover?" she asked. The vet smiled faintly. "With love, yes, but it'll take time." As they left, Hope leaned against her leg, pressing into her like a child afraid of being left behind. For the first time, she realized she wasn't rescuing him alone. He was rescuing her too. The night he stopped breathing, summer brought warmth and with it, a fragile peace. Hope played in the garden, chasing birds, his bark echoing through the air. But one evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, Clara noticed something wrong. His breathing was shallow, uneven. He collapsed beside the porch, eyes glassy, chest barely rising. Panic gripped her. "No, no, no." She lifted his head, calling the vet with trembling hands. The minutes stretched like hours. By the time they reached the clinic, Hope was limp in her arms. The vet worked fast. Oxygen mask, IV, murmured instructions. Clara stood frozen, her heart splitting. "Don't leave me," she whispered. The monitors beeped, slow, uncertain. Then, a pause, a silence that made the world tilt. "Come on, boy," the vet urged softly. "Stay with us." And then a sound, a faint, rasping breath. The monitor came back to life. Clara fell to her knees, sobbing in relief. The vet looked at her, eyes tired but kind. "He's a fighter," he said. "You both are." That night, Clara stayed beside his cage, her hand resting on his paw. She realized something then. She hadn't cried this hard since her husband's funeral. But this time the tears weren't for loss. They were for life refusing to give up. The sound of hope by autumn, the house at Willow Creek was gone. Grass grew wild where the fence once stood. But in Clara's yard, life bloomed again. Hope ran freely now, strong, radiant, unrecognizable from the skeletal creature she'd first met. Every morning, he sat by the porch watching the path, not out of longing anymore, but remembrance. Sometimes Clara joined him, coffee in hand. "You remember, don't you?" she'd whisper. Hope would wag his tail, eyes soft with understanding. Forgiveness lived in that look, not for those who left, but for the pain itself. One evening, as the sun sank low, Clara called across the yard. "Hope!" He turned, ears perked, bounding toward her with all the joy of the living. She knelt, arms open wide, and he leapt into her embrace. "You made it," she whispered, tears glinting in the golden light. We both did. That night he slept beside her bed, safe and home at last. Outside, crickets sang the same song that once echoed through his loneliness, but now it sounded like peace.